Hello, everybody, and welcome to Corporate Insights, the changing face of incentive travel, powered by Site Foundation. My name is Pádraig Gilligan. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at Site, and I'm joined for this presentation by Selena Sinclair, the CEO of Realm, based in the APAC region, and also a trustee at the Site Foundation. So we're going to talk you through the results of the second edition of this particular survey. But I think before we do, Selena, it probably is a good idea to just give a little bit of context and background around incentive travel and its use within corporations, particularly in the United States.
Great, thanks, Pádraig. So yes, very excited to be here to share the second edition of our Corporate Insights series. So I don't know how many of those tuning in did have the opportunity to listen into our first edition that was released in April of 2021. For those that didn't, you can listen to that content on the Site Global website at siteglobal.com. But we're here today to share with you, as Pádraig said, the September results and what is Corporate Insights. So this is the most recent project that's been undertaken by the Research and Content Committee at the Site Foundation. What is the reason we've launched this project? If you look at the meetings and incentives industry, it attributed $325 billion to the US economy, if you look at a recent study done by the EIC. In the incentive travel part of that industry, made up around 7% of the total. So a $22 billion industry that completely stopped at the beginning of 2020. So, of course, there is a great economic impact, as we all know, but beyond, the GDP contribution, we know that incentive travel contributes a lot in terms of the ability to create human connections, which, of course, we've all missed dearly during 2020. So, no doubt, there is a great loss of economic and social impact since the incentive travel industry has almost come to a standstill. So this Corporate Insight series was really aimed to start talking to corporations, to understanding what's going on in their world, what's affecting their decision-making, what are their timelines to going back to resuming their incentive travel programs again, really with the aim as the Site Foundation to provide as much intelligence to anyone involved directly or indirectly in the incentive travel industry as to what you can expect. What are the timelines that we have to get this industry back on its feet again? So as we talk through these results from the September survey, we will go back and do a comparison to the April results so that those who didn't catch already the results in April, this presentation will also make sense and to you. And really our aim of this session is to provide you as much intel as we can as we all start to try and plan for the future and hope we can all get back to doing business in this sector once more.
Excellent. Thanks, Selena. I think we'd like to start with a little bit of gratitude, always a good place to start. And we want to thank two of our great supporters who've really made this survey possible. Accor, global hotel brand, strong obviously in the incentive sector through the Fairmont brand, the Raffles brand as well. And then Abu Dhabi Convention and Exhibition Bureau, one of the truly emerging destinations, I think, in the world, and one that we see a lot of future potential in, particularly in relation to incentive travel. So thanks to Accor and to Abu Dhabi. You've made this possible, and for that we are very grateful. I think, Selena, if we jump straight into the first slide, there's some interesting demographic context here that we should probably highlight.
Yeah, so this just gives you a bit of a split of the industry sectors that our respondents have come from. So when we reached out to the companies, North American-based companies, we should highlight in April of this year, we did have a very similar split, but there is a slight change with this September survey. So we just wanted to kind of highlight that before we go through the results. As you can see, there is a strong influence from the finance and insurance sector. 52% of companies have come from the finance and insurance sector that have responded to the second survey. This is slightly more than we saw in the April survey. So what impact that will have on the results overall? Of course, we expect finance and insurance sector to be somewhat more conservative, but you'll see as we go through the results what those differences are. but we just thought it's important to call out that there is a slightly different mix in terms of the sector that has responded to the second survey.
We also have an increase in the direct selling category as well. It's up from 11% to 16% of the respondents. And again, that's a sector really that probably is characterized by a use of the pure incentive. So the incentive without necessarily having a corporate meeting associated with it. Very much the kind of the sector that seeks those kind of bucket list experiences, those extraordinary wow moments and so on. So very much I think a good indicator in relation to incentive travel and where it's going as well.
Definitely.
So we started, as we did in April, by asking a question in relation to the different type of incentive. We felt that was kind of important because, you know, not all incentives are exactly the same. We made that point already in relation to the direct selling sector. So there are classic incentives, or what we are calling classic incentives, that don't have any meeting component in them. There's a classic incentive that does have a meeting component. Then there's the kind of the reverse of that. There's a meeting that has some reward element to it. It might be a gala dinner, it might be a recognition event that is very much part of the event. And we're kind of, I suppose, categorizing that as a motivational experience, which is very much part of the incentive travel purview. Then we asked about virtual, which was obviously the new category that emerged in the course of the pandemic. When you weren't able to travel anywhere, how did you actually recognize the people who had contested and qualified for those programs? And there was some really, really creative virtual events that we saw happening during the pandemic. And then finally, hybrid. So what happens when we do go back to in-person, but we're not back to in-person everywhere? So would there be a kind of a hybrid sort of scenario where you might have some people attending in person and some people attending virtually? So they were the different categories that we were investigating in April and again in September. So Selena, what jumped out at us?
Well, look, in April, the main surprise I think that we saw in those results was the amount of companies who were looking at hybrids for their incentive travel programs. And that was definitely, you know, something that we were surprised to see so many companies were considering, you know, to integrate hybrid in their future planning and program design. That did slightly decrease in September of 2021. What that means, I think, is still to be seen. You know, what is a hybrid incentive? I think is something that's definitely been debated quite a lot within certain players of the industry. And to me, this category particularly more so talks about technology. As you said, we saw with, of course, the virtual incentives taking place during 2020, technology has played a big role within companies and their need to connect all of their employees or reward winners, obviously online. So, you know, how will that role of technology continue to play out as incentive programs are continuing to take place in the future?
But overall, I think what we're seeing between April and September is kind of a similar enough type of scenario. Those planning classic incentives are still doing so in roughly the same numbers. And I suppose the only thing that does cause some kind of interest to peak is that whole sort of piece around kind of virtual and hybrid and how it might be integrated into the future way we conceptualize what is an incentive travel program. The next question that we asked then asked about the impact of the pandemic and asked what way does the pandemic impact and continue to impact reward and recognition programs. We added an additional category in September to reflect a changing kind of reality around COVID. So can you talk us through that, Selena?
Yeah, sure. So this, of course, there was no surprise when we surveyed people in April. If you look at the second bar there, the blue bar, that 31% of companies had replaced, even in 2020, 71% of companies had replaced their incentive travel programs with another type of reward. At that stage, we had 31% of companies telling us that even in 2021, they would also be replacing their incentive travel program with another type of reward. As you can see, there's been, since April and September, a lot of companies also now looking at replacing their incentive travel programs with another type of reward. And I don't think that comes as any surprise. Destinations are still closed pretty much around the world. And so, even as an inbound operator in Asia, we hoped that programs would return at the end of 2020 and into 2021 and even into the beginning of 2022, but it's just not the reality at the moment. We see dates pushing out again into 2022, pretty much for all the events that we certainly had on hand. So I think that shift between the 31% to the 42% isn't a surprise, but obviously it is a big shift in the survey results that we've seen in September. And of course, as you said, we added the option for people to tell us why. And the Delta variant is obviously a key reason that confidence, we thought there was one wave of COVID or two waves, and now we're seeing 3, 4, 5 waves in certain countries and destinations. So, that's obviously adding to the volatility that we see within companies really wanting to kind of get back to planning their programs again. So, a big shift between April and September, but still a lot of optimism, in fact, and we'll see that on some of the other slides that we have coming up. But yes, the 2021 programs are definitely moving out to dates later into 2022 and beyond.
Very good. And I think that the next slide actually illustrates that even more graphically. So for those of us who are visual learners, I think the headline here is, wherever you see more color, that means that the program has been pushed further into the future. Is that a kind of a fair contextualization of these slides, Selena?
Yeah, of course. Look, we divided this slide into domestic meetings and domestic incentives, and international meetings and international incentives. So of course, as a reminder, these are North American based companies that have responded to this survey. And we were trying to find out, of course, when are those companies planning to resume their domestic meetings again versus when they may travel internationally. As I know, a lot of people on probably listening to this call are keen to know. And in both cases, as we can see on the slide here, these have moved out even into 2023 and 2024 in some cases. If we just focus in maybe on domestic meetings and domestic incentives to start, Porrick, you can see here that from a domestic perspective, companies should expect that they'll be resuming a majority of their incentive travel programs by Q2 of 2022. But if we look at international incentives, some of those are really now planning out to Q3 of 2022 into 2023. So these are really the timelines that we can expect from most of the North American-based companies.
And I think that therein the opportunity, not just within North America, but I think in other regions of the world. And I think we called this out previously, particularly in the white paper that accompanied the first set of results from Corporate Insights. Maybe won't get German incentives going to Thailand in 2022, or you may not get Brazilian incentives going to Florida in 2022, but you will get Brazilian incentives staying within South America. You'll get them going to Brazil, you'll get them going to Argentina, you'll get them going to Colombia, you'll get Germans going to Slovenia and Italy and Spain and Ireland. So I think you're seeing that already in the APAC region, Selena, aren't you?
Yes, indeed. So, most of our domestic meetings, like Singapore to Singapore, of course, we've got activity already happening within government restrictions. We have some events planned into early 2022 regionally. But yes, international incentives, we don't see any of those coming in until Q3 or to the end of 2022 or even later, as the slides indicate here. So yeah, that's definitely what we're seeing from the local perspective as well.
What would be your advice, Selena, as a long-standing DMC professional, with I suppose, a strong kind of dependency on those classic incentives coming from the finance insurance sector, often in the United States, coming into the likes of Australia or into the likes of Thailand and so on, where there was a really, really kind of strong spend and so on. And maybe, you were kind of working and training your DMC partners in all of those countries to really respond to that North American kind of culture and so on. Is there a new training required for DMCs to deal with their own regions?
Of course, languages play a big role in our region, Warwick. So it's really a requirement for us to be able to adapt, obviously, to the situation that we're in right now. And it's not only a change in culture and languages that we may need to adapt to deal with regional clients or traveling companies within the region. But, we've all pivoted to virtual events as well. We've had to look at completely new ways of earning revenues. Local events, of course, have been the bread and butter for most companies, and really diversifying into all new areas. And I know a lot of DMCs have done a lot of innovation during 2020 and now even in 2021. So yeah, the role of the DMC has changed from a short-term perspective. But what I would also say is there's a lot of work going on by DMCs to support international companies looking at coming into the destinations as well. There's actually, of course, a lot of questions that are on the table about re-entering destinations. What are the protocols? What do we have to think about? How will that change the operation when we do come, even in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now? So, DMCs have a bridging role at the moment between governments, between organizations, between the supply chain, to really try and educate and navigate as the companies try to get through the situation overall. Of course, then there's the safety management measures that are being implemented by governments, and the DMCs are all undergoing training and are upskilling their teams, getting certifications in that area so that, when the borders do open, they can support companies, no matter where they're coming from, to re-enter the destinations and operate in a compliant and safe environment. So yeah, there's a lot that's been going on, particularly in that area for DMC.
I think the DMCs have always been known for being dynamic, for kind of finding where the opportunities are and then adapting and training up to be able to respond to those. So I can see very clearly how something as radical as COVID is going to actually be, in a way, it's worrying, obviously, because it leads to a loss of revenue, but it's exciting in terms of how it really plays to that DNA thing that's in the DMC, to be innovative, to be kind of always looking for opportunity.
Indeed.
Excellent. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. We asked then of the changes being made in the light of COVID-19. In other words, changes were being made. Which of the following will be the most important for the future success of your incentive travel program? So again, some minor differences between April and September, although by and large, it's quite the same. But what would you call out, Selena?
Yeah, obviously when I saw these results come in September, look, when the April results came out, I think there was no surprise that contracts and risk management and safety were really high ranking in why people were, I think safety is even on our next slide, but contracts and risk management was really critical and trying to reduce risk around the contracting process. There was obviously a lot of issues that people faced with force majeure and all those other clauses. So that was a really big focus for companies. I was disappointed, to be honest, that sustainability didn't rank more highly in the first set of results. But I really think that was really due to the fact that, people are so caught up in all the other things that were needing to be done. So I'm pleased to see sustainability rank higher in the September results. And I think as we kind of start moving through to really the program content discussions on what incentive travel programs will look like in the future, I think sustainability will increase even in our next survey that we're planning to undertake in January of 2022. So for me, those were kind of the key ones. Of course, destination selection has always been a critical success factor for incentive travel programs. So that was, of course, no surprise.
Very good. Excellent. So the next slide is an interesting one and probably requires a little bit of detailed explanation on the basis that it may look to be a negative, but in fact we don't see it as a negative at all. In April, 93.75, which is effectively 94% of our respondents said that their C-suite, their leadership, were 100% behind the incentive travel program that they were running. And that was just an extraordinary endorsement to see that in the midst of COVID, like this is April 2021, almost all the leadership within these 50 companies that we've actually been speaking to in the United States, all of which are kind of serious Fortune 500 companies, and that there was such a level of support. We wanted to dive down into that and try and understand exactly what that meant. So we kind of broke it down a little bit, and what emerged then for us in September, Selena?
Look, the reason we asked this question actually in April is we really wanted to understand, is incentive travel sector even going to survive COVID-19, if we're honest. We really wanted to know, look, people have been given so many other choices of how they can connect people. And what does that mean for the future of the incentive travel industry? And that was really the purpose for this question when we asked that in April. Are companies still committed to planning incentive travel programs after when borders open and after the COVID-19 pandemic is hopefully behind us? And of course, as you said, look, 93.75% of companies said they were 100% committed to going back to doing incentive travel programs. So this was the first piece of good news, of course. And then, of course, as we've seen in the previous results, we kind of drilled a little bit more into what that meant. So yes, when we asked now in September, we wanted to understand maybe in a little bit more detail. It almost looked too good to be true, to be honest. We said 93.75% of people said yes. So it looked like we didn't provide the right score here, but 100% was the data that came back. So we were excited, but at the same time that we wanted to understand it a little bit more and put it into a little bit of context. So as you rightly mentioned, Porrick, we gave a couple of other options in the September survey, which we saw the two options being, yes, we're still committed, but we need to reduce risks. And yes, we're still committed, but we need to reduce costs. And I think, look, neither of those are either going to come as a surprise to us as an industry. We know the volatility that we are still having to deal with. So companies wanting to reduce risk is quite normal, but seeing obviously 30% of companies saying that's really, really important to them and is going to be a key priority. Reduced costs wasn't selected, honestly, as much as I thought it would be. We all know budgets have been reduced by companies. They've been managing to either not hold any incentive travel activity during 2020 or 2021, or in fact, they've done that virtually. So there has been significant savings potentially in some of those program executions. So I would have thought that reduced costs may have come up a little higher there, but at the same time, look, I've got some real life examples of companies that are coming to us and saying, look, we want to do our programs again in 2022, 2023, and now we're going to have double the amount of people. And so, you know, at the same time, it's that opportunity that they've not had to get people together, and they really want to now do that as soon as possible. And there will be potentially an increase in the number of people that they'd like to engage in the incentive travel experience. So of course, that comes with additional costs. So yeah, that's what we saw in September. Let's see, Porrick, what changes again by January. Of course, we hope the 100% committed doesn't change. But yeah, the drill down of that. And look, we do see a lot of optimism in North American-based companies. Everyone I speak to just can't wait to get back to traveling again. So I hope that optimism will remain as we ride out the last period of these COVID waves and get destinations to reopen.
An interesting kind of further point I'd make is that if we look at, say, the Incentive Travel Industry Index, which obviously Site Foundation is involved with FICP and IRF, our two research partners. We work with Oxford Economics on that particular survey. And we noticed a change in the first ITII that we undertook at the beginning of the COVID crisis, when we saw safety eclipsing everything else in terms of the concerns within organizations, but also money and finance and budgets and all of those things actually dropping in terms of how central they were. Traditionally, in terms of the top 3 destination criteria for selecting a destination, traditionally they always have been the appeal of the destination, the infrastructure in the destination suitable for incentives, and then the third one has always been value for money. They have been the 3 kind of criteria. We noticed the change with that first ITII survey, and certainly in the first edition of Corporate Insights, we saw a similar one where value for money was just down the rankings. We're going to see that, I think, shortly on another slide, but it was certainly down the rankings by comparison. And, I think what we're seeing that that companies are taking a different view. They're concerned about their people. They're concerned about protecting their people. They're concerned about their duty of care to their qualifiers and so on. And within that context, issues around safety become much more important than issues around value for money, which is it's a wonderful thing to see, isn't it?
Well, safety used to mean something different to what it means now. It used to be if you're in a destination, something may happen. Now, before you even consider to leave home, it's the paramount conversation that you need to make sure from the doorstep to the destination. So yeah, obviously we've all been upskilling in that area and preparing for that. So I think companies will start to have more confidence in that area as they start to see also other companies start to travel and those safety protocols being implemented effectively. So, and we've seen that on the local level as well with local events.
Exactly. And I think the next slide actually illustrates that very well. This is the slide, in fact, about destination selection and the criteria for destination selection, which are usually kind of access, infrastructure, destination appeal, value for money, safety, MICE infrastructure, and then in some cases kind of subsistence, whether a destination has any kind of program in place that actually helps a corporation, perhaps with the marketing of the program or whatever, often used more in relation to conferences than incentives, but some countries, some DMOs in some countries do have an incentive scheme also to attract corporations. What we're seeing here again, if we compare April and 21 and September 21, are some very, very interesting changes. First of all, destination appeal is back in its number 1 position. Safety has also increased in its positioning as well. But the one that I want to ask you to talk about, Selena, is one that in the overall scheme of things, it's quite down the rankings. But there's almost a kind of almost 100% kind of more importance given to it in September versus April. And what I'm talking about is MICE infrastructure. Now, what we mean by that in terms of selecting a destination, we mean, is there a DMO in the destination that understands what corporations want from incentive travel? Are they able to mediate that destination experience to a corporate and explain it in a way that actually links it into corporate objectives? Are there DMCs that are really kind of turned on, that are innovative, that are creative, that know how to really create a brilliant destination experience? Are there great hotels that have people that get the incentive thing? So it's really quite crucial to us. And I guess, over the years, we've always looked at that MICE infrastructure and we've been a little depressed at how kind of far down the rankings it tends to be from a corporate perspective. But when there's trouble in a destination, or when there's trouble in the whole process, all of a sudden the professionals in the destination take on a different level of meaning, really. How do you see that, Selena?
Yeah, of course, Brian. Relationships have played such a big role from the beginning of the pandemic. Of course, first with all the cancellations that had to take place for companies and how to kind of postpone or move a lot of the commitments that they may have had at destinations, and it plays an even bigger role now as they try to start to look at how to navigate the environment that is also changing all the time. But I think beyond even relationships, right, the thing that I think this really calls out here is also look at the destination level. Each destination has a different set of protocols that at the moment companies need to consider. And looking at what they mean, I think for the incentive travel program is really a key part of the conversation at the moment. When we get there, if we can get in, what is it that we are able to do and what are we not able to do? And this is changing all the time, and it is varying across the different destinations around the world. And that is obviously going to affect the destination selection process for companies, even when they're looking as far as 2022 and 2023. Because the reality is destinations are being chosen now, and we don't know the operating environment in 2023 or even 2024 and what that will even look like. So people can only go on the information they have at hand and the protocols that they may need to consider now for the future. So I think that's also playing a key role in, of course, the MICE infrastructure and destination appeal questions that we see here, and why one destination may be being chosen over another for companies that are already making those commitments for their programs for the future dates.
Definitely I think a thumbs up to the DMC sector, a positive statement in relation to the core value proposition of a DMC, which is the eyes and ears in the destination expert. And often those that level of expertise and those attributes are overlooked, but I think they're overlooked at your peril. And I think everybody now realizes that more so than ever when we have a situation where, being up to date with what's happening in the destination from the perspective of how you move people around in an incentive travel program is just so important. And it's the absolute purview of the DMC. We had a couple of...
I think the tourism boards are obviously playing a key role, beyond DMCs. The tourism boards and their ability to educate both DMCs and companies about how to navigate the situation. They're obviously linked also to all the decisions making within the government. So some tourism boards have been outstanding at their ability to communicate information as they come to light. So I think definitely tourism boards and their ability to provide visibility to the industry overall is a critical player right now.
Thanks for that, Selena. Thanks for saying that. It's actually crucially important. And I think the relationship between the DMOs and the DMCs is crucial as well in that regard. I think the more they work hand in glove together, I think the better that destination becomes known in the world of incentive travel. If we move on to the next slide, this is new. So we asked our corporate respondents in April to tell us what questions would they like us to include in future editions of the survey. We're very conscious of providing value to those people who are providing value to us by actually filling it in. And we did get quite a lot of very focused responses to this particular question. And we managed to kind of create 2 additional questions that captured then the variety of other concerns that our corporate planners had. And one of them was to rank the relative impact or the extent by which the considerations listed, there were 9 of them altogether, we've just put the first 5 here, have been incorporated into or impacted on incentive travel program design. One of them, obviously, corporate travel policies, in a way, is fundamental. If your corporation has a policy where no travel until December 2021, well, then you can't actually operate an incentive travel program, and that has been the case for some of our respondents, obviously. But there are other interesting ones here, Selena.
And I think I talked a little bit about these ones earlier, Pori, because most of the conversations going on at the moment, of course, are around protocols, what to expect at the destination. And if you look at point 1, 2, and 3, these are really all government driven and government policy dependent. And so, of course, understanding what this looks like, what this means for the operation and how to navigate this situation is important to all companies at the moment. So I also, of course, wasn't surprised to see particularly 1, 2, and 4, ranked as kind of the top of mind for companies at the moment as they're looking to go out and do their incentive travel planning and due diligence. Number 5, however, safe protocols, on-site PCR testing and antigen testing. I think this is something that's a little bit more optional for companies. Of course, some destinations require this anyway, not all. I know that's a big difference at the moment, particularly between some of the Asian countries and, say, the European countries. But of course, the option to also provide an additional layer of testing of participants once they arrive at the destination, if it's not already mandated, is something that obviously companies are looking at, and what the additional costs would be involved in order for them to do that. Of course, all of these things come with additional costs, probably apart from the vaccine certificates. And that's something we don't talk about in this survey, but of course is a topic that's ongoing within all the conversations that are going on between companies and destinations and the players within it.
Very good. The final question then on the next slide, again, came directly from our corporate respondents. They wanted to know, what are other companies doing? Do you know, like, we know what we think we might be wanting to do ourselves, but what are others doing? Because often it's, I think, the peer comparison that actually helps to formulate the protocol or the regulation. So what policies does your company have in place regarding vaccines, testing and safety protocols for their programs? And I think there's two interesting sort of, let's say, contrasts emerging here. On the one hand, we have companies who are saying they align their requirements with the requirements of the host destination. And then there's another, it's slightly less, I think it's about 45% of the companies are saying that they've just made an internal decision, and all program qualifiers who intend to travel must produce proof of vaccination. Any comments on this, Selena?
Yeah, I find those two things slightly a different question myself. I think vaccination now becomes quite expected if you're going to travel. So to see companies say that they need proof of vaccination being at 45%, I think we will see that increase as we look into future surveys. At the requirements from host destinations, aligning with requirements from host destinations, that goes beyond just vaccination and the ability to produce a vaccine certificate. And 54% of companies, what I took from that myself was, I was surprised actually, if you look at the first response, which is that companies don't have their own policy. Only 29% of companies have a policy. And so they're relying on the destinations to say, hey, this is what you need to do when you get here. And I think that will change as we look into future editions of this survey, because companies will adopt their own set of policies more and more, of course, I'm sure. But of course, the host destination situation is also changing all the time. So having your own policy, but then knowing what the host destination policies look like and the merging of the two. And we've definitely seen this also in some of the local events, for example, that we've been running in Singapore. We have the government protocols that we must adhere to, and the companies also have their local policies that they have already set out within their companies, and the merging of the two. So obviously, in most cases, going for where that policy is most strict, and then coming up with kind of an event set of policies that you apply, which is a mix of the destination policies and the company policies, to finally create your event specific policy. So yeah, I feel we will continue to see this area of policies evolve for companies, as I say, and continue to change for destinations overall.
Interesting. So that's pretty much the results of our September edition of the Corporate Insights. I've a couple more questions for Selena in the meantime, but we'll just leave on the screen as we chat some very nice positive statements that came from one of our corporate planners who shared what their company had been doing, even during the the difficult kind of Delta variant time and so on. So just have a read of that. It'll gladden your heart. But Selena, what I wanted to ask you kind of just before we actually sign off, just about a roadmap. I've heard so much, on podcasts. I've read so much, about the sort of the death of business travel, the death of, corporate travel programs, how travel management companies would struggle. And, when you think of it, you can see why there would be a reduction. A lot of the meetings that lots of corporate dollars were spent on, have happened very successfully over the last 18 months on Zoom. So, will CFOs sign off on those meetings in the future? I'm not sure they will. So within that kind of, incentive, within that sort of that business travel bucket of expenditure within an organization, I think, there will be some sort of, there will be some reduction. Will it impact on incentive travel, do you think?
So first part of the question, I would comment on the amount of meetings or global travel that took place in the past. Will that change? I think so. We all went to meetings that maybe didn't always have an outcome around the world. And so I feel that companies will be more looking to measure the impact of the travel that they do. Will the travel frequency reduce? I don't think so. As the pandemic finishes, we may see some level of reduction, but definitely the measurement of the success of that trip or the expenditure attributed to that meeting, I think will be much more on the agenda of companies than it was in the past. And I think that's a positive change that we would have seen out of COVID. The question about incentive travel specifically, look, the purpose of incentive travel is to create human connections and to drive business results on the back of motivational experiences. And as we know, having those experiences physically is a key part of the incentive travel experience. So I do see that the incentive travel sector will go back to its original levels. It will take time. What I think will change is what at least I know some of the companies that we work for, they tapped into new audiences during the virtual era of 2020 and 2021. And they will continue to want to speak with them, engage them, and maybe they will look at other ways to involve them in kind of mini trips or other ways to engage them, because those client groups or audiences that they had before have grown. So, and as I said to you earlier, that's what we're seeing in the inquiries that we see coming through. Therefore, 30%, 50%, 100% more participants. So, I don't think the incentive travel sector is over, if that's the statement that we're comparing ourselves to. But I certainly think that it's going to take time to come back. And then when it does, I think there's a lot of pent-up demand that we can expect at global destinations. So I'm sure we'll be enjoying the fruits of the volumes that we saw in 2018, 2019 again, but not until 2024, 2025 and beyond.
Selena, thank you so much for your great presence and explanations throughout our presentation today. And from yourself and myself, we'll sign off and thank everybody who tuned into this for watching. And please keep an eye out to siteglobal.com for the white paper, which will be published within the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Farik. Bye-bye.